Hey everyone, sorry about the delay. We're having a touch of technical difficulties with the webinar. But bear with me here 1 second, and we'll get started. Okay, thanks everyone for sticking around. I really do apologize for the delay. We were having some issues getting the webinar loaded, but I do appreciate your patience, and we'll get started right away. So thank you again all for joining us. What we're here to talk about today is creating a budget based on your values. That's a little bit of a weird title, but what we really want to do is walk you through the exercise of how you should be thinking about your money, how you should be thinking about your income as it comes in via cash flow, and how you can go about thinking about putting your money to work and utilizing it in the most efficient way possible. That's really what this is about, and what we really want to tap into is really understanding what's important to you and how you can go about kind of executing those things in your life that you're having trouble doing. So if you look here, my name is Dan Sharkey. I've been at 12 Points for 2 years. I'm a senior relationship manager here, and I'm going to walk you through exactly what we're talking about. So on slide number 3, where we're going to start are what are some common misconceptions about the budgeting process. Based on the most recent data by U.S. News and World Report, only about 50% of all Americans actually maintain a budget, and there's a reasons for that. So let's just talk about a couple of the key roadblocks that we have found for people who actually don't go through the process. I make a lot of money. I don't need a budget. On the flip side, I don't make a lot of money. What's the point? And lastly, why do I want to live my life via a spreadsheet? And what I really want to hone in on is all of these things are incorrect. It's not the way that you should be thinking about the budgeting process and managing your finances as you receive your income through whatever channel that is. And let's be clear about one thing right up front. Everyone, and I mean everyone, from Jeff Bezos down, is on some type of a budget. Now, the scope of that budget may be different. Obviously, Mr. Bezos is in a far different league than you I can ever anticipate being. However, everyone, no matter regardless of your wealth, has to operate within some constraint. And the most important thing to remember is that this process of going through and understanding the money that comes in, understanding where it's being spent, is constructive not only for wealth, to ensure that you're using your dollars most appropriately, but it also creates a tremendous amount of awareness that allows you to really execute what the goals are in your life, and we'll talk more about that in a second. So, what a budget should not be, and this is really where I want to get started because this is where most people find the immediate hang-up. So budgeting should not be viewed as restrictive. This is very much the old school way of thinking about it, and this is what we're here to talk about today to give you a good sense of what it should be thought about in 2020. So what it is not a financial diet. Budgeting should not be viewed as an ability to limit your spending in a restrictive way. You don't need to cut back on certain things if you don't want to. Any idea of budgeting being a diet as a financial diet is ultimately going to lead towards your failure. The second most important thing from our perspective is creating some type of moral or critical judgment of where your spending goes. We see this a lot with people saying, I shouldn't be buying this. What you need to do, instead of thinking about whether or not you should or shouldn't be buying X, Y, or Z, what you really need to do is think about what are your priorities? What are you really hoping to achieve? What really brings you happiness? If you find that your expensive gym membership or your ski pass or the new mountain bike is one of the most important things in your life, then by no means should you put a negative connotation on that spending. But then what you really need to do is ensure that the spending is balanced out through the rest of your life to ensure that you're staying on track. And then it's strictly an accounting exercise. If you're just looking at budgeting as a way to manage dollars in and out, it's ultimately going to fail. So as we look forward, what does it should look like? So what it should look like is a development of what is really important to you. Thinking about what you're looking to achieve, thinking about what your goals are, what the goals of your family are. What I mentioned before about what are the things that truly bring you joy, that make you happy. If that expensive ski trip or that new mountain bike or the weekly trip to the salon are things that are important to you, then those should be moved further up the priority list. And it's okay that those are financial goals. What you need to do then is ensure that you structure your life around the things that are actually important to you, and the things that are just wasteful are what can be cut. It's a commitment to achievement. By undertaking it and reshaping your mindset under this perspective, what you're really saying is that you are looking to the future, that there is something important in your life that you are looking to achieve, and you are taking the steps to actually ensure that gets put into place. And lastly, probably one of the biggest themes that I would like to kind of leave you with when this is all over is that this is really just creating long-term financial awareness, is understanding what is important to you, what you can use those dollars for, and what the impact of saving those dollars or putting those dollars to work in a certain way ultimately leads to your ultimate success. Okay, so again, what a budget should be. It's awareness is created through the budgeting process. If you have ambition in life, having this awareness allows you to foster a greater sense of achievement. And it's the change in mindset that really can create a significant shift in your behavior. Again, kind of to try and summarize what we talked about, it being restrictive versus prioritized, cutting spending with no rationale as to why. That's where the moral judgment comes in. You know, the idea that I shouldn't be doing this or I shouldn't be doing that. Remove that from your vernacular, remove that from your thinking. If you don't have a clear goal and you don't have a clear path forward, then simply cutting spending arbitrarily is not going to do much of is not going to provide much of a change that leads to your success. Making the cuts to your spending arbitrary. Why spend $50 for lunch as opposed to 60? What difference does that make? You know, without understanding the bigger picture, by simply cutting amounts that you think are going to make a difference, you're really not moving the overall needle. And then the guilt-ridden misery, as I like to put it, about not making progress because the steps you're doing are very much like a diet. Don't eat the donut, don't have the ice cream. But if you take a step back and you actually understand how the impact of your choices either helps or impedes your goals towards success, you're more likely to stick with the overall plan. So what do we want you to do instead? Okay, we want you to isolate what's important to you. Really sit down and prioritize of all the things that I spend money on a monthly or annual basis. What are the things that are most important to me, that bring me the most happiness, and that ultimately get me closer to achieving the goals that I set forth for myself? If you haven't taken the time to actually identify what those goals are, then very much like a diet, you're really not going to understand, and you're really not going to be able to see that plan through to completion. What you really have to do is understand what you're doing, isolate what's important to you, and then structure your income and your budget from the top down. And how do we do that? Well, by isolating those goals and committing your dollars to those goals first, at the end of the month or at the end of the year, whatever time period you're looking at, you can be assured that whatever is actually left over can be spent freely. You've made your contributions to your retirement plan. You've saved for a down payment for your home, or you've saved for that really expensive trip that you plan to take next summer. Once you have committed the requisite dollars and understood what the impact of the schedule that you're now on is, you can then spend freely, knowing that you're on track to achieve your goals as you see fit. And that's really the most important thing, is creating that mental freedom and the discipline to commit your dollars to what's important to you, and then have the ability to have whatever's left over to be spent freely. That's ultimately what we want to leave you with. So what we propose is there are some tricks and tips that you can go through to look at your financial situation and redefine what it is like for you throughout the budgeting process. We have some methods here that I'm going to walk you through. And what I want to make clear is that a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here is not gimmicky. It's not something that you're going to find online about this is how much you should commit to lifestyle expenses. This is how much you should commit to your mortgage. This is how much you should commit to other parts of your life. That in and of itself projects some type of judgment about what you should or should not be doing with your own money. That's not the view that we're going to take. We think that you should do with your money what brings you the most happiness and what makes the most sense for the goals that you are looking to achieve. There is no right or wrong answer to that question. There are simply implications from those choices. Now, everyone needs to operate on some level of restraint simply because everyone, as I mentioned earlier in the call and earlier in the session, everyone has a budget regardless of your wealth level. Your spending habits will be different. What you're actually buying will be different, but everyone has some restriction that they need to operate within. And that's okay. But what you can do by kind of taking these tips and implementing in your own life, you can again continue the shift, not only in your mindset, but in your practice to getting to look to what you're hoping to achieve. So just real quickly, we're going to go into each of these in more detail, but aligning your income expenses, what we're calling giving every dollar a job. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Calculating your spending. How are you actually measuring what you're currently spending? And then technology and how that can be best utilized in your personal life. So most people have a random scattering of when bills are due. The water bill is due on the 5th, the rent payment's due on the 1st, the cell phone bill is due on the 15th, the credit card bill is due on the 10th, the car loan is due on the 21st, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So just looking at this simple graphic here, what we've done is just simply highlight that most people get paid every 2 weeks, or that has been the standard for a long period of time. Some people get paid twice a month, but just for the sake of this example, we're assuming every 2 weeks on Friday. And if you have not taken the time to think about when your expenses come due, your personal balance, your personal bill pay looks probably something like this. Just random scattering throughout the month of when you actually pay your bills. Yet, most companies, most creditors, allow you to choose the day of the month that makes the most sense for you to pay your bills. So if you just look at this simple example that I have up here on the screen, we're saying 7 days in the month that bills are due, they're weighted very heavily in the first 2 weeks of the month. So what does that do? Well, that puts pressure on you as the individual to ensure that you have enough capital in those first 2 weeks to pay all of those bills on time. So why don't we just shift the mindset a little bit and use the platforms that are available to us? The creditors are allowing us to make this subtle change. So what if that becomes this? You simply align and space, and my recommendation would be to space this out as evenly as possible so that you can come on a more set schedule. What's missing from here, you'll notice, is that usually rent payments, if you're a renter, are due on the first of the month, not before that. But if you have a flexible landlord, or if you can do it at the end of the month in anticipation of the first, this can definitely still work for you. So look what we've done. We've simply shifted the random scattering of due dates into bundled expenses. So I know that if my weekly check is $1,000 every other Friday, and I have $2,500 of expenses on a monthly basis, I can simply separate those out and more closely align my income receipt and my expense payment. Now, I wouldn't do them on the same day because there's always a concern that there's a processing delay or some type of lag in when you actually receive those dollars. But by closely aligning the receipt of income and the expense payment, you better understand your net amount on a monthly basis. And by doing this over and over and over again, you not only space out your expenses throughout the entire month, they don't become clustered together, but you're more easily able to understand and see what's left over after you've paid yourself and paid your creditors promptly. This is a really cool trick. And again, this is all readily available. There are very few creditors that don't allow you to modify your due date. This may cause you to have to pay perhaps 1 month in advance to kind of get on your terms, but most every bill out there allows you to change the due date. I would encourage you to do that and space it out through the month so you're not burdened on one half of the month or the other. This is a really kind of a cool trick and allows you to kind of streamline your cash flow more easily. Give every dollar a job. So what does that mean? If you notice the envelopes on the screen, what I really want you to envision is imagine this is the early 1900s and you're being paid in cash. Okay, you would come home from work with an envelope in your pocket, and then every bill that you would have due would each require a little envelope on your kitchen table. And what we want you to do, and another way to think about this is a $0 budget. All that means is that you have to fill up every envelope on your table with all the money that you have. Now, each envelope is going to be, thought about differently. So you have your savings. That's what you're paying yourself. Your down payment for your home, your 401k savings, savings for a rainy day fund, that trip you're going to take. Then you have your expenses and obviously debt payments, student loans, mortgage, things like that. And what you really want to do is ensure that every dollar that comes in is actually put to one of these buckets. Now, why is that important? Because this plugs any leaks in the boat. We've all been there, and I am no exception. I'm sure most of you listening are no exception, that you think you have more money than you do, and you don't really understand where it all goes. And that's because you're not being intentional with your choices. By taking this type of approach, you're able to actually isolate every dollar that comes in, and at the end of the month, you have nothing left to allocate. Now, when you take this approach, it's also important to acknowledge that there's walking around petty cash, whatever you want to call it, that you have to, isolate. And that's the money that you're left over after you've done this exercise. A really easy way to undertake this, again, utilizing technology, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but a lot of financial institutions will allow you to have open as many accounts as you want. There are, things such as Ally that, again, you can open up accounts depending upon the purpose of the funds that you have. But if you take this approach and you give every dollar a job and assign every piece of income into these buckets or into these envelopes, it'll really allow you to ensure that nothing falls through the cracks, that there's no holes in the boat, and will help you kind of move yourself along to ultimately achieving what your financial goals are. This is a very, very common question when clients of ours come in, and the first thing we look at is their budget and cash flow. 9 times out of 10, people simply go back and look at what their last months of spending were and assume that's what they spend throughout the whole year. This is a common problem. It's an easily rectifiable problem, but if it goes unchecked, it can actually be a little bit of a problem. Let me explain why. Throughout the course of your year, your cash flows tend to be lumpy, while your income generally is fairly static. We'll talk about bonuses and stuff in a minute, but let's just focus on the expense side of the ledger. Summer, holidays, Valentine's Day, birthdays, all happen within random times throughout the year, and all generally require a different level of spending depending upon who you are as a person and what you like to do. If you only look when you're doing the budgeting process at the most recent month or a random month, you're not really appreciating the differences in your spending throughout the course of the year. So if you look at this graphic, if we just took only July, well, then we're not counting the money that we spend on the holidays. We're not counting the summer vacation. And what ultimately ends up happening is that people have to make up those shortfalls in cash flow with credit cards or other, short-term debt instruments, which leads to this vicious cycle of never being able to get your head above water. So what you really have to do to really undertake an accurate and comprehensive budgeting process is you have to look at your spending throughout the entire year, from January to December, and then average it out on a monthly basis. So if you're going to take a $5,000 trip to Aruba in August, or to the Cape, or wherever else you may be going, or you're going to go to ski in Big Sky during the winter, you have to ensure that you're allocating funds in July, September, October, November for that trip that's going to occur the following winter. Those types of decisions allow you to not need to rely on short-term debt and not need to rely on other sources that get you ultimately behind the 8 ball. Once you get into that cycle where you can't catch up, that's where the credit card debt builds and you're not able to actually get ahead. So when you actually look at your expenses, and you really make sure that you look at the entire year, because that's going to give you a better sense of what your actual spending is and better prepare you your savings capability to afford those things in due time, even if they're not being paid for in the minute. So, in the moment. So make sure that you acknowledge that cash flow is not the same every month, and by doing so, but it will really allow you to get better ahead as you move through the whole year. Very much in line with what I just discussed about thinking about your budget in terms of the whole year and broadening your horizon to understand really where your expenses are. You always have to think about budgeting as a forward-looking exercise. Now, with that said, it is important to understand what you were spending, because that provides you a baseline of what your income and expenses have been. But let me just provide kind of a quick example. If you're a young couple or an older couple, it doesn't really, age isn't overly important necessarily, and you're looking to perhaps buy your house or sell your house and retire, and you're thinking about all the things that are going to change. But if you were to simply look back at what you had been spending, you're going to miss a lot of future expenditures. So let's just take the example of the young couple that I mentioned. Well, what about an expanded family? Or if you move to the suburbs, do you need another car? How about daycare costs? Do you get a dog? Now that you've kind of escaped city life, you want to travel to really to put those dollars to better work. All of those things need to be considered when you're going through this budgeting process, especially if you're doing it for the first time. Massive changes in your cash flow, i.e., the most obvious example is children, for example. Well, what does daycare look like? What are those costs going to be? Does one parent have to pull back on their work hours? Will that have some impact on the income side? All of those questions really need to be asked, and they can only be fully appreciated if you're looking at your budget in forward-thinking terms. Again, important to understand how much you had historically spent, because that's going to be your baseline. But if you don't think about what is going to occur in the future, you're always going to put yourself a little bit behind when trying to understand how we can best utilize your budget. So every presentation that we do, and we do these once a month, and I'm a frequent presenter, there's an app for everything. It doesn't matter if it's legal documents, it doesn't matter if it's retirement savings, it doesn't matter if it's budgeting, it doesn't matter if it's student loans, on and on and on. These are just a quick sampling of stuff that's out there that allows you to quote unquote make your budgeting process easier. My Envelopes, Mint, which everyone knows and hates, Quicken, which is more of an accounting base, Acorns, Personal Capital, Accountabout, Money Dance, et cetera, et cetera. And if you went online, you'd find 50 more, all offering the same level of services. I personally do not think these companies are offering you anything that you are not able to do on your own with relative ease. And ultimately, if your mindset doesn't change about how you think about the budgeting process, nothing on this screen as just a quick sampling is really going to help you. It's really more about how you view the world, how you view your financial goals, and how you calibrate the changes that you actually want to make. These are great tools for implementing the strategy that you've already come to understand. If you don't understand that change in mindset or that strategy first, these are not going to help. Plus, the good versions of these come with a cost. And even if it's small, $8.99, $10.99 a month, I don't necessarily think they're going to deliver the value that you would need unless your mindset fully changes. So we're going to talk more about other technology in just a second, but I would, before you dive into this world, I would strongly urge you to think that I don't believe that this is a solution. You have to start with your mindset first and changing the view of that prism before you can actually dive into something that's going to end up costing you money. And if you don't have the right mindset, you're probably not going to stick with it anyway. So I would be very wary of jumping into these solutions too quickly. Categories. So talking about technology and just how you're kind of viewing the world. Every financial institution generally allows you to categorize for free the transactions that you occur on a monthly basis. So if you're using your debit card, if you're using a credit card, whatever the case may be, you can tag what that expense is: dining out, entertainment, gas, groceries, et cetera, et cetera. Utilize, from a technology standpoint, if you're the type of person that wants to be able to categorize these things to help you make decisions, utilize what's readily available to you. There's no need to implement a third party when everything you may need might be right at your fingertips. I would also encourage you to look at it in two different ways. And depending on your institution, you may be able to do this all in the same shot. A lot of people think about it as, the expenses. What category does this fall into? And what the brilliance of these of taking this approach is, when you make recurring payments, or when you buy the same things over and over again, as most people do, you don't have to go back in and reclassify whatever that transaction is. By taking this approach, it's going to allow you to understand where your money's going, and not provide the need that you would feel to go ahead and hire a third party. Another important characteristic about this that I really want to hammer home: fixed versus variable. Fixed is the payments that you have to make. And I would encourage you to think about payments you have to make as payments, like we discussed earlier, payments to yourself for achieving your financial goals. If you know you want to retire by a certain date, you want to make that down payment on a new house, view those as fixed expenses. Very similar to the idea of zero cost budgeting, in which you fill up all your envelopes. Ensure you fill up those envelopes first, and that'll just actually achieve your goals in a shorter period of time by plugging any leak that may be occurring. If you utilize these programs within the institutions that you already use, that you're already paying for, you can really understand what's fixed and what's variable. If you have a high variable rate of expenses, then there's a lot more opportunity for you to have to achieve your goals. If your fixed expenses are way too high, well, why is that? Should you think about moving to a cheaper apartment? Should you, how much do you enjoy what you would consider to be those fixed expenses? So it's simply a feedback and data loop that can be tremendously transformative as you get kind of further along. Okay, so those are basic tricks and tips that we wanted to walk you through. We did get a couple of questions ahead of time that I just want to address now before I can open it up to the panel. And starting first, this is from Katie, who asked about credit cards and how much credit cards should be used and whether or not we would recommend actually using them. So we get this question a lot, and it's not uncommon. And what I would say is that credit cards in and of themselves are not the problem. You are the problem. Credit cards can be a tremendously valuable tool because it allows you to have quick access to cash or to credit if you need it. You're able to build and sustain a great credit level, which it will come in handy later on in life. And it also allows you, if utilized correctly, to ensure that you're capturing some other tangential benefit, whether it be travel points or cash back, whatever the case may be. But all that credit cards are simply the vehicle that people should use, and in our minds doesn't necessarily impact the budgeting process. Credit cards simply allow you to buy the stuff that you need. They're not a tool to determine whether or not those expenses are needed. So we think credit cards can be very helpful if used responsibly, but ultimately you have to remember that a credit card is simply the vehicle in which you actually execute a transaction. The understanding of whether or not that expense should be undertaken or not needs to come back to the individual, not the vehicle being used. The next question is from Dave. It's about bonus income and how does that factor into your budget? That's a great question, and it's a point that I discussed earlier that I wanted to come back to, so thank you for bringing that up. Bonus income. It really depends on how reliable that particular bonus is. A great strategy to utilize if you do have bonus income that is not the majority of your salary. There are some occupations out there who have a very, very low, if you're in sales, for example, and your bonus is really kind of reliable and makes up the bulk of your income, this is not the best strategy for you. But let's just say that your bonus makes up a smaller, less than 20% of your income. What we like to see is understanding your budget without that income being included. And then once you're able to actually roll that income in, you can use it to fund things or do things that you don't necessarily have to spend on. It allows you to go on that trip. It allows you to boost your retirement savings, whatever is most important to you. Again, by defining your financial goals and values, you're better able to understand where that money can be put to best use. But if by designing your budget without that bonus money included, you build yourself a tremendous amount of flexibility and optionality. And I think over the long term, that really adds a tremendous value to the choices that you have to make and the ability for you to navigate your financial world without any constraints. The worst case scenario with a bonus structure that you can find yourself in is if you overextend and rely on that income, and for whatever reason, it is no longer available. And what we're going through right now is a perfect example. So what we don't want to happen is for you to have a mortgage or a rent payment or some other expense that is entirely reliant on that bonus, because there is a chance that could always be cut. So if you don't necessarily bake it into your assumptions as part of what is guaranteed, then there's an easier way and there's a better way to attack it and allow you to ensure that you don't put yourself in a disadvantageous position. So those are the only questions that we had. So I'm just going to take a brief pause. If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to type them in. And I'll just take a brief pause, and if not, we'll wrap it up. All right, doesn't look like there's any other questions. So we'll leave it here. And the one thing I just want to say before we leave is what I hope you can take from this is not only the tips and tricks, but really changing the mindset. Historically, people have just figured out this is how much money I make. You pay your expenses indiscriminately, and then if there's some money left over, you put some here, you put some there. You don't really think much about it. If you just change that view and you change the equation a little bit, do a little mental algebra, and you commit your dollars and you take the time to think about what's important to you, the freedom that comes with the ability to spend whatever is left over without guilt or without the feeling that whether or not you're on the right track is a tremendous benefit. I actually think that taking the time to go through this budgeting process is more uplifting, and you feel the burden that comes off your shoulders by knowing that you're doing the right thing and then not worrying about the money that you're spending, as opposed to feeling at the end of every month, is this where I should really be? That simple change in view in ensuring that you're paying you've made the list to understand what's most important to you and what it's going to take to get there, paying that to yourself first, or saving that money first, and then allowing the rest to fall into place, I think adds a tremendous amount of value to your life. And provides a weight that comes off your shoulder. So if there's one thing I can leave you with is that I think that ultimately will lead to your biggest success. As you can see on the screen, here's my email address and phone number. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. We'll be posting this online as well. And again, if you have any questions now or anyone has any follow-up they'd like some help on, please do not hesitate to reach out. I hope everyone had a wonderful long weekend. It looks like the weather's outside, especially if you're in Massachusetts. It looks like it's good today. Everyone, please stay safe, and thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Okay, take care.